His quest began in 1895, when, as a 16-year-old, he imagined what it would be like to ride alongside a light beam. A decade later came his miracle year, described in the letter, which laid the foundations for the two great advances of 20th century physics, relativity and quantum theory. A decade after that, in 1915, he wrested from nature his crowning glory, one of the most beautiful theories in all of science, the general theory of relativity. As with the special theory, his thinking had evolved through thought experiments. Imagine being in an enclosed elevator accelerating up through space, he conjectured in one of them. The effects you'd feel would be indistinguishable from the experience of gravity. His tale encompasses the vast sweep of modern science, from the infinitesimal to the infinite, from the emission of photons to the expansion of the cosmos. A century after his great triumphs, we are still living in Einstein's universe, one defined on the macro scale by his theory of relativity and on the micro scale by a quantum mechanics that has proven durable even as it remains disconcerting. If he did not have that electrified halo of hair and those piercing eyes, would he still have become science's preeminent poster boy? Suppose, as a thought experiment, that he had looked like a Max Planck or a Niels Bohr. Would he have remained in their reputational orbit, that of a mere scientific genius? Or would he still have made the leap into the pantheon inhabited only by Aristotle, Galileo, and Newton? The latter, I believe, is the case. His work had a very personal character, a stamp that made it recognizably his, the way a Picasso is recognizably a Picasso. He made imaginative leaps and discerned great principles through thought experiments rather than by methodical inductions based on experimental data. The theories that resulted were at times astonishing, mysterious, and counterintuitive, yet they contained notions that could capture the popular imagination. The relativity of space and time, E equals mc squared, the bending of light beams, and the warping of space. Adding to his aura was his simple humanity. His inner security was tempered by the humility that comes from being awed by nature. He could be detached and aloof from those close to him, but toward mankind in general, he exuded a true kindness and gentle compassion. Yet for all his popular appeal and surface accessibility, Einstein also came to symbolize the perception that modern physics was something that ordinary laymen could not comprehend, the province of priest-like experts, in the words of Harvard professor Dudley Hirschbach. It was not always thus. Galileo and Newton were both great geniuses, but their mechanical cause and effect explanation of the world was something that most thoughtful folks could grasp. In the 18th century of Benjamin Franklin and the 19th century of Thomas Edison, an educated person could feel some familiarity with science and even dabble in it as an amateur. A popular feel for scientific endeavors should, if possible, be restored, given the needs of the 21st century. This does not mean that every literature major should take a watered-down physics course or that a corporate lawyer should stay abreast of quantum mechanics. Rather, it means that an appreciation for the methods of science is a useful asset for a responsible citizenry. What science teaches us very significantly is the correlation between factual evidence and general theories, something well illustrated in Einstein's life. In addition, an appreciation for the glories of science is a joyful trait for a good society. It helps us remain in touch with that childlike capacity for wonder about such ordinary things as falling apples and elevators that characterizes Einstein and other great theoretical physicists. That is why studying Einstein can be worthwhile. Science is inspiring and noble, and its pursuit an enchanting mission, as the sagas of its heroes remind us. Near the end of his life, Einstein was asked by the New York State Education Department what schools should emphasize. In teaching history, he replied, there should be extensive discussion of personalities who benefited mankind through independence of character and judgment. Einstein fits into that category. At a time when there is a new emphasis, in the face of global competition, on science and math education, we should also note the other part of Einstein's answer. Critical comments by students should be taken in a friendly spirit, he said. Accumulation of material should not stifle the student's independence. A society's competitive advantage will come not from how well its schools teach the multiplication and periodic tables, but from how well they stimulate imagination and creativity. His success came from questioning conventional wisdom, challenging authority, and marveling at mysteries that struck others as mundane. This led him to embrace a morality and politics based on respect for free minds, free spirits, and free individuals. Tyranny repulsed him, and he saw tolerance not simply as a sweet virtue, but as a necessary condition for a creative society. It is important to foster individuality, he said, for only the individual can produce new ideas. This outlook made Einstein a rebel with a reverence for the harmony of nature, one who had just the right blend of imagination and wisdom to transform our understanding of the universe. These traits are just as vital for this new century of globalization, in which our success will depend on our creativity, as they were for the beginning of the 20th century, when Einstein helped usher in the modern age. Childhood, 1879 to 1896. The Swabian. He was slow in learning how to talk. My parents were so worried, he later recalled, that they consulted a doctor. Even after he had begun using words, sometime after the age of 2, he developed a quirk that prompted the family maid to dub him Der Depperter, the dopey one, and others in his family to label him as almost backwards. Whenever he had something to say, he would try it out on himself, whispering it softly until it sounded good enough to pronounce aloud. His slow development was combined with a cheeky rebelliousness toward authority, which led one schoolmaster to send him packing, and another to amuse history by declaring that he would never amount to much. These traits made Albert Einstein the patron saint of distracted school kids everywhere. But they also helped to make him, or so he later surmised, the most creative scientific genius of modern times. Einstein was descended on both parents' sides from Jewish tradesmen and peddlers, who had, for at least 2 centuries, made modest livings in the rural villages of Swabia in southwestern Germany. Hermann Einstein was exceedingly friendly, mild, and wise, his son would recall. With a gentleness that blurred into docility, Hermann was to prove inept as a businessman and forever impractical in financial matters. But his docility did make him well suited to be a genial family man and good husband to a strong-willed woman. At age 29, he married Pauline Koch, 11 years his junior. Pauline's father, Julius Koch, had built a considerable fortune as a grain dealer and purveyor to the royal Württemberg court. Pauline inherited his practicality, but she leavened his dour disposition with a teasing wit edged with sarcasm and a laugh that could be both infectious and wounding, traits she would pass on to her son. From all accounts, the match between Hermann and Pauline was a happy one, with her strong personality meshing in complete harmony with her husband's passivity. Their first child was born at 11:30 a.m. on Friday, March 14, 1879, in Ulm, which had recently joined, along with the rest of Swabia, the new German Reich. Initially, Pauline and Hermann had planned to name the boy Abraham after his paternal grandfather, but they came to feel, he later said, that the name sounded too Jewish. So they kept the initial A and named him Albert Einstein. Munich. In 1880, just a year after Albert's birth, Hermann's featherbed business foundered, and he was persuaded to move to Munich by his brother Jakob, who had opened a gas and electrical supply company there. Pauline and Hermann had a second and final child, a daughter, in November 1881, who was named Maria, but throughout her life used instead the diminutive Maya. When Albert was shown his new sister for the first time, he was led to believe that she was like a wonderful toy that he would enjoy. His response was to look at her and exclaim, "Yes, but where are the wheels?" As a child, Einstein shied from boisterous games and instead occupied himself with quieter things. One governess nicknamed him Father Bore. He was generally a loner, a tendency he claimed to cherish throughout his life, although his was a special sort of detachment that was interwoven with a relish for camaraderie and intellectual companionship. The great awakenings that happen in childhood are usually lost to memory, but for Einstein, an experience occurred when he was 4 or 5 that would alter his life and be etched forever in his mind, and in the history of science. He was sick in bed one day, and his father brought him a compass. He later recalled being so excited as he examined its mysterious powers that he trembled and grew cold. The fact that the magnetic needle behaved as if influenced by some hidden force field, rather than through the more familiar mechanical method involving touch or contact, produced a sense of wonder that motivated him throughout his life. I can still remember, or at least I believe I can remember, that this experience made a deep and lasting impression on me, he wrote on one of the many occasions he recounted the incident. Something deeply hidden had to be behind things. After being mesmerized by the compass needle's fealty to an unseen field, Einstein would develop a lifelong devotion to field theories as a way to describe nature. Field theories use mathematical quantities, such as numbers or vectors or tensors, to describe how the conditions at any point in space will affect matter or another field. For example, in a gravitational or an electromagnetic field, there are forces that could act on a particle at any point, and the equations of a field theory describe how these change as one moves through the region. As the science historian Gerald Holton has noted, Einstein regarded the classical concept of the field the greatest contribution to the scientific spirit. His mother, an accomplished pianist, also gave him a gift at around the same time, one that likewise would last throughout his life. She arranged for him to take violin lessons. At first he chafed at the mechanical discipline of the instruction, but after being exposed to Mozart's sonatas, music became both magical and emotional to him. Music was no mere diversion. On the contrary, it helped him think. Whenever he felt that he had come to the end of the road or faced a difficult challenge in his work, said his son Hans Albert, he would take refuge in music, and that would solve all his difficulties. The violin thus proved useful during the years he lived alone in Berlin, wrestling with general relativity. He would often play his violin in his kitchen late at night, improvising melodies while he pondered complicated problems, a friend recalled. Then, suddenly, in the middle of playing, he would announce excitedly, "I've got it!" As if by inspiration, the answer to the problem would have come to him in the midst of music. One widely held belief about Einstein is that he failed math as a student. In fact, he was a wonderful student, at least intellectually. At age 12, he began learning geometry and algebra on his own, with encouragement from his uncle Jakob Einstein, the engineer. "It's a merry science," Jakob explained. "When the animal that we are hunting cannot be caught, we call it X temporarily and continue to hunt until it is bagged." Einstein's greatest intellectual stimulation came from a poor medical student who used to dine with his family once a week. It was an old Jewish custom to take in a needy religious scholar to share the Sabbath meal. The Einsteins modified the tradition by hosting instead a medical student on Thursdays. His name was Max Talmud, later changed to Talmy when he immigrated to the United States, and he began his weekly visits when he was 21 and Einstein was 10. He was a pretty, dark-haired boy, remembered Talmud. In all those years I never saw him reading any light literature, nor did I ever see him in the company of schoolmates or other boys his age. Talmud brought him science books, including a popular illustrated series called People's Books on Natural Science, a work which I read with breathless attention, said Einstein. The 21 little volumes were written by Aaron Bernstein, who stressed the interrelations between biology and physics, and he reported in great detail the scientific experiments being done at the time, especially in Germany. In the opening section of the first volume, Bernstein dealt with the speed of light, a topic that obviously fascinated him. Indeed, he returned to it repeatedly in his subsequent volumes, including 11 essays on the topic in Volume 8. Judging from the thought experiments that Einstein later used in creating his theory of relativity, Bernstein's books appear to have been influential. For example, Bernstein asked readers to imagine being on a speeding train. If a bullet is shot through the window, it would seem that it was shot at an angle, because the train would have moved between the time the bullet entered one window and exited the window on the other side. Likewise, because of the speed of the Earth through space, the same must be true of light going through a telescope. What was amazing, said Bernstein, was that experiments showed the same effect no matter how fast the source of the light was moving. In a sentence that, because of its relation to what Einstein would later famously conclude, seems to have made an impression, Bernstein declared, "Since each kind of light proves to be of exactly the same speed, the law of the speed of light can well be called the most general of all nature's laws." Bernstein was, as Einstein would later be, eager to tie together all of nature's forces. For example, after discussing how all electromagnetic phenomena, such as light, could be considered waves, he speculated that the same may be true for gravity. A unity and simplicity, Bernstein wrote, lay beneath all the concepts applied by our perceptions. Truth in science consisted in discovering theories that described this underlying reality. Einstein later recalled the revelation and the realist attitude that this instilled in him as a young boy. Out yonder, there was this huge world which exists independently of us human beings and which stands before us like a great eternal riddle. Einstein's exposure to science produced a sudden reaction against religion at age 12, just as he would have been readying for a bar mitzvah. Through the reading of popular scientific books, I soon reached the conviction that much in the stories of the Bible could not be true. The consequence was a positively fanatic orgy of free thinking, coupled with the impression that youth is intentionally being deceived by the state through lies. It was a crushing impression. Einstein's rebellion against religious dogma had a profound effect on his general outlook toward received wisdom. Suspicion against every kind of authority grew out of this experience, an attitude which has never again left me, he later said. Indeed, it was this comfort with being a nonconformist that would define both his science and his social thinking for the rest of his life. The opposition he felt to all types of regimentation made his education at the Munich Gymnasium increasingly irksome and contentious. The mechanical learning there, he complained, seemed very much akin to the methods of the Prussian army, where a mechanical discipline was achieved by repeated execution of meaningless orders. Einstein's discomfort spiraled toward depression, perhaps even close to a nervous breakdown. In 1894, when Einstein was 15, his father's business suffered a sudden reversal of fortune. The Einstein Brothers Company went bust. His parents and sister, along with Uncle Jakob, moved to northern Italy, first Milan, and then the nearby town of Pavia, where the company's Italian partners thought there would be more fertile territory for a smaller firm. Einstein was left behind in Munich at the house of a distant relative to finish his final 3 years of school. Instead, he took a train across the Alps to Italy and informed his alarmed parents that he was never going back to Germany. Instead, he promised he would study on his own and attempt to gain admission to a technical college in Zurich the following autumn. Aarau. Einstein spent the spring and summer of 1895 living with his parents in their Pavia apartment and helping at the family firm. In the process, he was able to get a good feel for the workings of magnets, coils, and generated electricity. In October 1895, after months of intense self-directed study, Einstein took the entrance exam to Zurich Polytechnic. Not surprisingly, he easily passed the section of the exam in math and science, but he failed to pass the general section, which included sections on literature, French, zoology, botany, and politics. The Polytechnic's head physics professor, Heinrich Weber, suggested that Einstein stay in Zurich and audit his classes. Instead, Einstein decided, on the advice of the college's director, to spend a year preparing at the cantonal school in the village of Aarau, 25 miles to the west. It was a perfect school for Einstein. The teaching was based on the philosophy of a Swiss educational reformer of the early 19th century, Johann Heinrich Pestalozzi, who believed in encouraging students to visualize images. He also thought it important to nurture the inner dignity and individuality of each child. Students should be allowed to reach their own conclusions, Pestalozzi preached, by using a series of steps that began with hands-on observations and then proceeded to intuitions, conceptual thinking, and visual imagery. It was even possible to learn and truly understand the laws of math and physics that way. Rote drills, memorization, and force-fed facts were avoided. Einstein loved a row. Pupils were treated individually, his sister recalled. More emphasis was placed on independent thought than on punditry, and young people saw the teacher not as a figure of authority, but alongside the student, a man of distinct personality. Not surprisingly, it was at this school that Einstein first engaged in the visualized thought experiment that would help make him the greatest scientific genius of his time. He tried to picture what it would be like to ride alongside a light beam. In a row, I made my first rather childish experiments in thinking that had a direct bearing on the special theory, he later told a friend. If a person could run after a light wave with the same speed as light, you would have a wave arrangement which could be completely independent of time. Of course, such a thing is impossible. This type of visualized thought experiments, Gedankenexperiment, became a hallmark of Einstein's career. While a student in Aarau, Einstein boarded with a wonderful family, the Wintelers, whose members would long remain entwined in his life. There was Jost Winteler, who taught history and Greek at the school, his wife Rosa, soon known to Einstein as Mamer, or Mama, and their 7 children. Their daughter Marie would become Einstein's first girlfriend. Another daughter, Anna, would marry Einstein's best friend, Michele Besso, and their son Paul would marry Einstein's beloved sister, Maya. Papa Jost Winteler was a liberal who shared Einstein's allergy to German militarism and to nationalism in general. His edgy honesty and political idealism helped to shape Einstein's social philosophy. Like his mentor, Einstein would become a supporter of world federalism, internationalism, pacifism, and democratic socialism, with a strong devotion to individual liberty and freedom of expression. More important, in the warm embrace of the Winteler family, Einstein became more secure and personable. One of his schoolmates, Hans Beiland, later wrote a striking description of the impudent Swabian, who made such a lasting impression. Sure of himself, his gray felt hat pushed back on his thick black hair, he strode energetically up and down in the rapid, I might say crazy tempo of a restless spirit which carries a whole world in itself. Most notably, Beiland added, young Einstein had a sassy, sometimes intimidating wit. He confronted the world's spirit as a laughing philosopher, and his witty sarcasm mercilessly castigated all vanity and artificiality. Einstein ended his year at the Aarau School in a manner that would have seemed impressive for anyone, except one of history's great geniuses, scoring the second highest grades in his class. Alas, the name of the boy who bested Einstein is lost to history. That qualified him to take a series of exams, written and oral, that would permit him, if he passed, to enter the Zurich Polytechnic. He scored the best grade among the 9 students taking the exam, and in the fall of 1896 headed off to Zurich. The Zurich Polytechnic, 1896 to 1900. The Impudent Scholar. The Zurich Polytechnic, with 841 students, was mainly a teachers' and technical college when 17-year-old Albert Einstein enrolled in October 1896. Einstein was one of 11 freshmen enrolled in the section that provided training for specialized teachers in mathematics and physics. He lived in student lodgings on a monthly stipend of 100 Swiss francs from his Koch family relatives. Each month, he put aside 20 of those francs toward the fee he would eventually have to pay to become a Swiss citizen. He did become a Swiss citizen in February 1901 and would retain that designation his entire life. Theoretical physics was just coming into its own as an academic discipline in the 1890s, with professorships in the field sprouting up across Europe. Its pioneer practitioners, such as Max Planck in Berlin, Hendrik Lorentz in Holland, and Ludwig Boltzmann in Vienna, combined physics with math to suggest paths where experimentalists had yet to tread. Because of this, math was supposed to be a major part of Einstein's required studies at the Polytechnic. Einstein, however, had a better intuition for physics than for math, and he did not yet appreciate how integrally the two subjects would be related in the pursuit of new theories. It was not clear to me as a student, he admitted, that a more profound knowledge of the basic principles of physics was tied up with the most intricate mathematical methods. With his casual willingness to question authority, his sassy attitude in the face of regimentation, and his lack of reverence for received wisdom, Einstein was not a model student. Rather than following the curriculum, he preferred to study, based on his own interests and passions, with one or two friends. Because many of the Polytechnic lectures seemed out of date, Einstein and his friends read the most recent theorists on their own. I played hooky a lot and studied the masters of theoretical physics with a holy zeal at home, he recalled. Even though he was still priding himself on being a vagabond and a loner, he began to hang around the coffee houses and attend musical soirees with a congenial crowd of bohemian soulmates and fellow students. Despite his reputation for detachment, he forged lasting intellectual friendships in Zurich that became important bonds in his life. Among these was Marcel Grossmann, a middle-class Jewish math wizard whose father owned a factory near Zurich. Grossmann took copious notes that he shared with Einstein, who was less diligent about attending lectures. His notes could have been printed and published, Einstein later marveled to Grossmann's wife. When it came time to prepare for my exams, he would always lend me those notebooks, and they were my savior. What I would have done without those books I would rather not speculate on. Music continued to beguile Einstein. It was not so much an escape as it was a connection to the harmony underlying the universe, to the creative genius of the great composers, and to other people who felt comfortable bonding with more than just words. He was awed, both in music and in physics, by the beauty of harmonies. Susanne Markwalder was a young girl in Zurich whose mother hosted musical evenings featuring mostly Mozart. She played piano, while Einstein played violin. He was very patient with my shortcomings, she recalled. At the worst, he used to say, "There you are, stuck like the donkey on the mountain," and he would point with his bow to the place where I had to come in. His distracted demeanor, casual grooming, frayed clothing, and forgetfulness, which were later to make him appear to be the iconic absent-minded professor, were already evident in his student days. He was known to leave behind clothes, and sometimes even his suitcase when he traveled, and his inability to remember his keys became a running joke with his landlady. Einstein's new bohemian life and old self-absorbed nature made it unlikely that he would continue his relationship with Marie Winteler, the sweet and somewhat flighty daughter of the family he had boarded with in Aarau. He broke off the relationship with a letter to Marie's mother, and rebounded by falling into the arms of someone who was just about as different from Marie as could be imagined.